Hi, this is Mary from the Daily Sew. This video is going to show you how to do a full bust adjustment on a pattern with a dart and a pattern without a dart. This video is part of a series on how to get a better fit, so if you're ready, let's go. So how do you know you need to do a full bust adjustment? Well, here's a good example of when you would do one. Now, it's not obviously straining across the bust, but sometimes you will see that strain just right across the breast. But it is having these little kind of like diagonal lines coming toward the breast. It is a little bit of a strain. What the giveaway is, one, the front underneath the bust is slightly higher than the side, so you can see it's kind of coming down. The side seams are pulling forward. So this is a side seam on the mannequin and this is a side seam on the bodice. It's not a lot, but still it's pulling forward, which means it's taking the extra fabric from the back and it's bringing it to the front where the body needs it. And then again, the back is lower. So this is a good example of when you need to do a full bust adjustment. Now, sometimes, that said, the dart position can make all the difference in the world. You could bring the dart a little closer to the apex, further away from the apex, lower, higher, lower, higher, and moving the dart position can make a big difference in the fit, especially if the style has a lot of ease in it already, design ease, and you don't need the extra room. So maybe you haven't made a test garment yet, but you know that this is a common problem you have. It's usually tight across the bust when you make garments, or you already know that the difference between your high bust measurement and your full bust measurement are different than what the pattern is drafted for. So if you watched my video on how to pick the best size pattern for your body, you know that you're picking the size based on your high bust and not your full bust. And this is because it gives you a much better fit across the upper chest and shoulders, which are a lot harder to adjust the pattern for. But it will leave you many times with a bust, a pattern that the bust is just too tight. And so that's why we're going to do a full bust adjustment. So start with taking your high bust measurement and your full bust measurement. Watch my video, get the right fit for how to take these measurements accurately. The difference between your high bust and your full bust tells you what pattern cup size you are. Forget about bra cup size, this is not the same. In pattern drafting, the cup size is going to refer to the difference in inches between the high bust measurement and the full bust measurement. So if you have a 1 inch difference, you are a pattern A cup. If you have a 2 inch difference, you are a pattern B cup. 3 inch difference equals a pattern C cup, and so on. So what cup size is the pattern drafted for? Well, most companies will tell you on their website, if not the pattern, what they've drafted for. So Vogue, Buttrick, McCall's, and Simplicity all draft for a 2 inch difference, or a B cup, between the high bust and the full bust. If you have a 3 inch difference and your pattern was drafted for a 2 inch difference, you already know, especially if the style is fitted, that you're going to need to add 1 more inch in the bust. So another way to find out if the pattern is going to fit you is to take your body measurements plus your desired amount of ease and compare that to the flat pattern or the finished garment measurements should the pattern provide them. A lot of patterns do now. So what do I mean by ease? The minimum ease, also known as wearing ease, is the amount of fabric beyond the body measurements added to the style, the pattern, in order for you to move in the garment. And then there is additional ease, design ease, that is added to make the styles, like a swing top or an oversized t-shirt. It goes way beyond the body measurements and what you need to move in it. And the amount of wearing ease, that minimum ease, is going to depend on the type of fabric that the design is meant for. So thicker fabrics need more wearing ease, and garments that are made to go over layers, like coats and blazers, also will have a little bit more ease in order to accommodate the layers underneath the garment. Here's a guide for minimum bust ease. For blouses, dresses, jumpsuits, 2.5 to 3 inches or 6.5 to 7.5 centimeters. Unlined jacket, 3 to 4 inches or 7.5 to 10 centimeters. Lined jacket, 3.5 to 4.5 inches or 9 to 11.5 centimeters. Coats, 4 to 5 inches or 10 to 12.5 centimeters. So know what amount of ease that you need or you want, and add that to your body measurement. Compare against the finished garment measurements if the pattern provides them. If not, write them down and we're going to measure the pattern. The bust apex is where the bust is the fullest. Pattern has a bust apex, as does your body. And on a well-made pattern, a well-drafted pattern, the apex is marked. It should circle with a little cross in it. And when you want a good fit, it's ideal if the pattern's bust apex and your bust apex line up. They're in the same location. If you have a tissue pattern, this is pretty easy to check. You can lay the tissue against your body, mind where the seam allowances, center, front, and all that are, so that you have it in the right place. This one's pretty close, so I wouldn't change it. If it's more than a ½ inch away, you'd want to change it, but this one is almost spot on. I think that's the fullest. And that's how you would do it if you have a tissue pattern. Another way you could do it is to measure down from mid-shoulder to the fullest point, note that amount, and then measure from the fullest point over to the fullest point, and make a note of that. You can then measure your pattern and see where your apex is on the flat pattern. Measure down from shoulder to bust apex area on the pattern if it's marked. If it's not marked, the dart will be pointing to that apex, but it'll be at least an inch away. Remember to skip over the seam allowance when you're measuring. Measure the distance that you got from your shoulder to your apex and make a mark on the pattern. Then measure over from the center front 1/2 of your apex to apex distance. So remember to measure from center front, which is not always the edge of the pattern piece. Make a mark. Where the two marks meet, this is your apex location. And you can tell right away here if you're going to need to raise or lower your bust dart, and that is a different video. You should raise or lower the pattern's apex before you do any bust adjustment, so this mark is going to be very helpful. Then you're going to measure across the pattern at the bust apex level, and it can be helpful to fold out the dart. When measuring, make sure to exclude the seam allowance. Double this amount for the width of the complete front. Add the width of the back pattern piece to this, and then compare the pattern measurements to your body measurements plus your desired ease. Then you know how much you need to add. You cannot add an infinite amount to the pattern with a full bust adjustment alone. It's going to distort the pattern too much. So if you need more than 4 inches total added, you will need the full bust adjustment and another type of alteration. This is a bodice with a bust dart. So you have your pattern or you have a copy of it, and your apex is marked. Take a ruler and draw a line parallel to the grain line from the apex to the waist or the hem. Draw a line from the apex to somewhere in the lower third of the armhole. Draw a line through the middle of the dart to the apex. Now, because you've marked your apex, this line may not go through the tip of the dart, and that's okay because we're going to redraw the dart once we're done. So you'll have 3 lines. One that's parallel to the grain line from the apex to the waist or hem, apex to the lower armhole, and from the dart to the apex. Get some scissors and cut from the waist to the apex. Turn at the apex to the armhole and cut stopping just shy of the edge. You're going to leave a little hinge of paper there. Cut on the 3rd line from the side seam to but not through the apex, leaving another hinge. Slip a piece of paper under your pattern and tape down part of the center edge to keep it in place. So now we add the extra room you need. And you add half of what you need because your pattern represents only half of the front bodice. The 2 halves are going to be either sewn together or cut together on the fold, and that will provide the total amount you need. So if you needed 2 inches, you're only going to add 1 inch to this half of the pattern. Spread the pattern horizontally at the apex, half the amount you need to add. And be sure that the cut edges of your patterns will stay parallel to each other. They are staying, that amount you need to add to this half the amount you need to add total, they are staying that amount apart from each other all the way down. Secure the edges down near the apex area. And you can see that the dart spreads apart automatically the distance that it needs to be. But you also see that the front hem is now off. Remember how the front hem under the bust before the full bust adjustment was rising up? So that extra length is needed to go over the full bust, and now you see how much extra length you need. We're going to match that center piece of the pattern to the side of the pattern. Cut the center straight across perpendicular to the grain line. Bring it down, staying lined up with the grain line or the center front until it lines up across the bottom with the side of the pattern, and tape it down. So make sure the bottom seam is smooth. Check that the armhole is smooth. We need to redraw the dart legs. You measure the top dart leg and it's going to stay the same length. You just bring the tip down more toward the center. Then draw in the new bottom dart leg and it's going to stay equal in length to the top leg. This is the new dart point and the apex has stayed in place. To get the shape of the side seam, you fold the dart shut by folding the bottom leg up to meet the top leg. If the side seam is untrue after folding and it doesn't line up, you just go ahead and redraw a smooth line. You take off the excess side and you add to the lesser side. Probably the same amount is what you're aiming for. This is called truing, and I have a video about that. Now cut on your new line with the dart folded. There's your side seam. Refold the dart and check that the back pattern piece is true to the new front piece at the side seam. True that seam if needed. The width of the waist has grown because you expanded the pattern. If you don't want or need this extra room, you can take it off the side seam. A bodice without a dart can use the simpler pivot method. Trace your pattern onto another piece of paper. Mark the seam allowance at the shoulder and armhole. Measure over from the armhole side seam half the amount you need to add to the bust and make a mark on the paper. Using a pencil tip or pin, hold the pattern down at the intersection of the armhole shoulder seam. Swing the pattern out so that the underarm hits your mark. Then trace the new pattern position to get the new armhole. Move your pencil or pin down to the armhole side seam intersection to hold the pattern down and pivot the pattern back so that the side seam meets the original side seam at the waist or hem, and then trace this placement for the pattern's side seam. This is your new pattern. The side seam may need to be raised at the waist so it can keep its original length. You want to check against the back pattern piece at the side seam there to make sure that these pattern pieces are still true and equal distance. Well, I hope you found this video helpful. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments below and I'll be sure to reply. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.